The galaxy was unraveling, spinning into chaos as the Vrelkan Dominion extended its shadow across 300 star systems. Their conquest was methodical, merciless, and inevitable. The Vrelkans, towering figures with iridescent skin that shimmered like liquid metal, moved with the precision of a machine. Their four luminescent eyes surveyed the universe with an unsettling calm, while their floating, whip-like tentacles pulsed with energy, functioning as both sensory tools and weapons of unparalleled lethality. Their fleets, massive biomechanical, leviathans powered by psionic energy, left devastation in their wake. Shields impenetrable, weapons unmatched, there was no escape for those who resisted. The Galactic Council, once a beacon of unity, was now a fractured entity of desperate, pleas and empty strategies. Messages for aid echoed through the cosmos, many answered by mighty warriors from distant worlds. The Ozkirians sent their colossal juggernauts. The Andorran Confederacy deployed elite shock troops clad in armor that glimmered under alien suns. Yet Earth's response was unorthodox. Rick Carter's name wasn't chosen from a roster of legendary fighters. He wasn't a tactician or a pilot with 100 victories. He wasn't even a soldier. Rick was a mechanic, a grizzled, perpetually annoyed man in his mid-40s with a knack for fixing the unfixable and an unhealthy attachment to a modified wrench he'd affectionately named Sally. When Earth's leaders had asked for volunteers, Rick hadn't raised his hand. He'd cursed loudly about idiots breaking things, and somehow that had been enough for them to push him onto a mission no one else wanted. The briefing had been brief, too brief for Rick's taste. The Vrelkan's fleet was moving toward the core systems, their next target an allied world critical to the galactic resistance. The mission was to infiltrate the Dominion's flagship, locate its central psionic hub and disable it. The Council provided a rundown of advanced gadgets and tactics, most of which Rick ignored. He packed a toolkit muttering, "I'm a mechanic, not a damn spy," and boarded the transport ship that would take him to the fight of his life. Now staring at the massive organic monstrosity of the Vrelkan flagship through the viewport of his transport, Rick felt an unfamiliar flicker of apprehension. The ship pulsed with a dim, eerie light, its surface shifting and alive, as though the entire structure breathed. He sighed, gripping Sally tighter. "Let's get this over with," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. As the transport approached, Rick's mind buzzed with frustration and sarcasm. The Council expected him to take down an empire with little more than tools and grit. "Hell of a plan," he grumbled. But beneath the cynicism was a spark of determination. He might not be a hero, but he'd never walked away from a job half done. The transport docked, the airlock hissed, and the flickering glow of the Vrelkan corridors spilled into the chamber. Rick Carter stepped inside, his boots echoing on the organic metallic floor. The hum of the ship's energy filled the air, vibrating in his chest. "Well, Sally," he muttered, "time to see if we're as good as they say." The air inside the Vrelkan flagship was thick and alien, filled with a metallic tang that stung Rick's nose. The walls of the corridor pulsed faintly, shifting as though alive, their bioluminescent veins casting a sickly green glow. Each step echoed unnervingly, as though the ship were listening, feeling his presence. Rick tightened his grip on Sally, his wrench, and muttered, "Great. A haunted spaceship. Just what I needed." Ahead, the corridor branched off into several pathways, each marked by symbols glowing faintly on the walls. The symbols were intricate, almost fractal in nature, and seemed to rearrange themselves when Rick tried to focus on them. "Perfect. Alien Sudoku," he quipped, rolling his eyes. They couldn't just put up signs. Pulling a compact scanner from his toolkit, Rick attempted to analyze the symbols. The scanner sputtered, its display filled with unintelligible glyphs, before abruptly shutting down. "Useless," he grumbled, shoving it back into his pocket. Trusting his instincts more than the Council's fancy gadgets, he chose a path that seemed to pulse more faintly than the others, hoping it was less traveled. The further he went, the louder the hum of the ship grew, a deep resonant vibration that seemed to echo within his bones. It was unsettling yet strangely rhythmic, like a heartbeat. He paused at a junction, examining a large jelly-like membrane stretched across the wall. It quivered at his presence, and for a moment Rick swore it shifted toward him, as if studying him back. "Nope," he muttered, stepping away. "Not messing with that." The silence was broken by a sudden whirring sound, followed by a sharp metallic clang. Rick froze, spinning on his heel. From a shadowed alcove emerged a drone-like sentinel, its body a grotesque fusion of sleek metal and pulsating organic material. Tentacle-like appendages sprouted from its sides, each tipped with razor-sharp blades, its central eye glowing a menacing red, locked onto Rick. "Of course," Rick sighed, raising Sally. "Because why wouldn't this thing have tentacles?" The drone lunged, its appendages slashing through the air with unnatural speed. Rick ducked, his reflexes honed not by training but years of dodging heavy machinery in tight spaces. He swung Sally with all his might, striking the drone's central. Giant sparks flew and the creature recoiled, its movements erratic. "Not so tough now, are you?" Rick taunted, dodging another strike. Using a panel of exposed wiring nearby, he ripped out a bundle of cables and jammed them into the drone's body. The machine convulsed violently, its appendages spasming before it collapsed in a heap of twitching parts. Rick stood over the wreckage, catching his breath. "First blood," he muttered, inspecting the remains. With a few quick strikes of Sally, he dismantled the drone further, pocketing anything that looked remotely useful. "They send warriors. We send a mechanic," he said to himself, shaking his head with a smirk. "Let's see how they like a human with a wrench." As he moved deeper into the ship, Rick couldn't shake the feeling that the walls themselves were watching. The ship seemed to react to his presence, subtly altering its layout, like a predator adjusting its trap. Somewhere far ahead, an unsettling screech echoed, metallic and organic, sending a shiver down his spine. "Yeah," Rick muttered, gripping Sally tighter. "This is going to get worse before it gets better." Hiding in a maintenance alcove, Rick wiped sweat from his brow and studied the mess of cables and fluid-covered components he'd salvaged from the destroyed drone. The alcove itself was unsettling, a cramped, pulsating chamber with walls that occasionally exhaled a faint, damp vapor. "Maintenance bay, huh?" he muttered, rolling his eyes. "Feels more like a digestive tract." As he tinkered with the alien tech, something caught his attention. Among the tangled wires was a small, translucent crystal core. It pulsed faintly, emitting rhythmic flashes that seemed oddly familiar. Holding it up to the light, Rick frowned. "This little guy's the brains," he murmured, flipping it over in his fingers. "Looks like their systems run on... what? Psionic energy?" The realization hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just a power source, it was alive, or at least reactive. He stared at the core, his thoughts racing. If this tech was psionically driven, that explained the ship's unnerving behavior and its ability to adapt. The Vrelkons weren't just using technology, they were merging with it, living in symbiosis with their machines. "Creepy bastards," Rick muttered, stuffing the core into his pouch. He turned his attention to the alcove's control panel, a warped organic interface glowing faintly. Its symbols shifted and pulsed as he approached, reacting to his proximity. "All right, let's see what you're hiding," Rick said, pulling out Sally and carefully prying open the panel's exterior. Inside was a mess of conduits and shimmering fluid tubes, all feeding into a glowing nexus. With a few taps and a calculated yank on a bundle of wires, the panel's display changed. A hologram flickered to life, projecting a distorted image of a Vrelkan scientist. The figure was slender, with their iridescent skin reflecting the light like a living opal. Their four glowing eyes seemed to pierce through the hologram as they spoke in a deep, resonant tone. Rick's universal translator struggled for a moment before stabilizing. "Systems destabilizing, core dependency increasing. Without a stable psionic catalyst, the fleet's integrity will collapse." Rick squinted at the projection. "Catalyst? What's that supposed to mean?" The hologram continued. "The chosen specimen must resonate with the psionic matrix. The compatibility must be perfect. Without it, the Dominion's expansion will halt." Rick's brow furrowed. Chosen specimen. He leaned closer, his mind piecing together fragments of information. The psionic energy, the ship's erratic behavior, the mention of compatibility. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. His heart sank as he recalled the Council's insistence on his participation in the mission, their vague assurances that he was perfect for the job. "Ah, hell," he whispered, realization dawning. "It's me. I'm their damn catalyst." The ship shuddered violently, as though reacting to his thoughts. The walls around him rippled and a low hum grew louder, resonating through the alcove. The hologram fizzled out, replaced by a piercing red glow. Somewhere deep within the ship, an alarm wailed, its tone organic and mechanical all at once. Rick scrambled to gather his tools, his mind racing. Great! Now the creepy death ship knows I'm here. Time to move. As he stepped into the corridor, the ship's walls seemed to shift, narrowing and twisting as if guiding him or corralling him. "All right, Sally," Rick muttered, gripping his wrench. "Looks like we're playing tag with a sentient murder machine." He moved quickly, his boots thudding against the organic floor, the ship's unsettling hum echoing in his ears. The truth of his role weighed heavy, but Rick had no time to dwell on it. The Vrelkons weren't just hunting him, they needed him, and they weren't going to stop until they had him. Rick's boots pounded against the pulsating floor as the ship's walls seemed to close in around him, twisting and reshaping with an unsettling organic fluidity. The low hum he'd grown used to intensified, vibrating through his chest like an ominous heartbeat. Lights flared ahead of him, crimson and erratic, casting jagged shadows across the biomechanical surfaces. "Not creepy at all," Rick muttered, gripping Sally tighter. He rounded a corner only to come face to face with two Vrelkan soldiers. Their towering forms blocked the path, each armed with organic weapons that seemed to grow from their arms, elongated tendrils ending in jagged, crystalline blades. Their four glowing eyes locked onto him with predatory precision. "Perfect timing," Rick said, stepping back cautiously. The soldiers moved in unison, their movements unnervingly smooth as they advanced. Rick's mind raced. He wasn't a fighter, he didn't have a laser rifle or armor, but he did have Sally and a lifetime of figuring out how to fix or break anything mechanical. The first soldier lunged, its blade slicing through the air. Rick ducked low, narrowly avoiding the strike. Swinging Sally with all his strength, he struck the soldier's arm, sending sparks flying as the crystalline blade fractured. The creature stumbled, its movements faltering, as though its organic and mechanical parts were struggling to realign. "Didn't like that, did you?" Rick taunted, sidestepping the second soldier's attack. He spotted an exposed panel on the wall behind them, bioluminescent veins running through it like circuitry. With a reckless burst of determination, he darted past the soldiers, his boots skidding on the slick surface. Yanking a bundle of tools from his belt, Rick jammed them into the panel. Sparks erupted as the ship let out a deep, guttural groan, its organic systems reacting violently. The soldiers froze momentarily, their movements becoming jerky and disjointed. "Looks like you're all connected," Rick muttered, twisting wires and smashing circuits. The panel pulsed erratically, and the hum of the ship shifted, its rhythm faltering. The soldiers staggered, their glowing eyes dimming as they collapsed, their bodies twitching in a pool of metallic fluid. Breathing heavily, Rick stepped back, his face slick with sweat. "Sally, you're gonna need a medal after this," he said, patting the wrench before moving on. As he advanced deeper into the ship, the environment became increasingly unstable. The walls flickered between glowing and dark, while tendrils of organic matter coiled and uncoiled as if in pain. Rick knew he was close to something important, something central. It wasn't long before he found it, a massive chamber at the heart of the ship, its walls lined with pulsating, semi-transparent sacs filled with glowing fluid. In the center stood a towering structure, a psionic core throbbing with waves of radiant energy. Its light cast eerie patterns across the chamber, illuminating the figures guarding it. Rick stepped into the chamber cautiously, but before he could take another step, a voice resonated through the room. It wasn't a physical sound, it echoed directly in his mind, cold and calculating. "Human," the voice said. "You cannot comprehend the power you stand before. Surrender, and your purpose will be fulfilled." Rick looked around, gripping Sally. "Yeah, I've heard that before, usually from someone who's about to get a wrench to the face." A figure emerged from the shadows, a Vrelkon unlike the others. This one was larger, its body encased in shifting layers of crystalline armor, that glowed faintly with psionic energy. Its tentacles writhed with a menacing grace, and its eyes burned with an intensity that made Rick's stomach churn. "I am Krilx," the figure said, its voice reverberating in Rick's mind. "You are the catalyst we have sought. Your defiance is irrelevant. The Dominion will endure." Rick smirked, though his heart raced. "You talk too much, Krilx. Let's see if you're as tough as you look." Without waiting for a response, Rick charged toward the core, his mind formulating a desperate plan. If he could disrupt the psionic flow here, the entire fleet might collapse. But Krilx wasn't about to let him succeed without a fight. Krilx moved with terrifying precision, its crystalline armor refracting the light from the psionic core into jagged, blinding patterns. Tentacles lashed out toward Rick, their tips glowing with volatile energy. Rick dove to the side, rolling across the pulsating floor as the tentacles struck where he had been moments before, leaving scorch marks that sizzled and smoked. "Yeah, great plan, Rick," he muttered, gripping Sally as he scrambled to his feet. "Charge the big glowing death. Monster, brilliant." Krilx advanced, each step sending tremors through the chamber. "You are delaying the inevitable," the Vrelkan commander said, its voice drilling into Rick's mind like icy needles. "You are not a warrior. You are insignificant." Rick smirked, sweat dripping down his face. "Insignificant? You're throwing a lot of energy into killing a guy with a wrench." The distraction bought him a second to assess the chamber. The psionic core pulsed rhythmically, sending waves of energy through conduits that lined the walls, connecting to the ship's systems. Nearby, a bundle of exposed conduits sparked, possibly damaged from the ship's earlier instability. That was his target. Krilix lunged, and Rick barely dodged, the commander's crystalline blade slicing through the air inches from his head. He swung Sally with all his might, aiming for the base of one of Krilix's tentacles. The wrench struck true, a sickening crack reverberating as the tentacle recoiled in pain, its glow flickering. Krilix let out a low, resonant growl that shook the chamber. "Your resistance is futile," it roared, its tentacles flaring with renewed energy. Rick took the opportunity to sprint toward the exposed conduits, ducking and weaving to avoid the relentless strikes of the commander. Reaching the conduits, Rick pulled a small, modified device from his tool belt, one he'd cobbled together from the salvaged drone parts. "Time for some old-fashioned sabotage," he muttered, jamming the device into the tangle of conduits. Sparks erupted, and the chamber shuddered violently. The psionic core's glow flickered, its rhythm faltering. Krilx staggered, its crystalline form dimming momentarily. "What have you done?" it demanded, its voice laced with fury and pain. "Just a little rewiring," Rick said, smirking. "Turns out you guys aren't as indestructible as you think." The psionic core pulsed erratically, sending waves of destabilizing energy through the ship. Krilx roared, lunging toward Rick with all its might. Rick had no choice but to run, narrowly dodging a tentacle strike that shattered a nearby wall. He grabbed a discarded cable and swung it at a support beam connected to the core's stabilizer, delivering a final blow with Sally. The entire chamber groaned and the psionic core began to collapse. The ship's systems went into chaos, its organic walls convulsing and splitting. Krilix, now visibly unstable, staggered toward Rick, its armor fracturing. "You will not escape!" it bellowed. Rick spotted a maintenance hatch near the edge of the chamber. "Sorry, Krilx," he said, already sprinting, "this mechanic's clocking out." Diving through the hatch, Rick slid down a bioluminescent chute that deposited him into a smaller corridor. The ship was tearing itself apart, sparks and debris raining from the ceiling as its systems imploded. Rick sprinted through the narrowing passageways, his heart pounding, until he reached an escape pod dock. He slammed his fist on the console and the pod's hatch hissed open. Throwing himself inside, he initiated the launch sequence. Through the viewport, he could see the ship convulsing, its vast form collapsing inward as the psionic energy spiraled out of control. As the pod ejected, the ship detonated in a blinding explosion, a shockwave rippling across space. Rick shielded, his eyes exhaling heavily. "One mechanic, 0 empires," he muttered, slumping into the seat. Hours later, Rick's escape pod docked at the Galactic Council's station. Leaders from countless species crowded the hangar, watching in stunned silence as the pod opened and Rick stepped out, covered in soot and grime, gripping Sally. "You actually did it," one council member stammered, their voice trembling with disbelief. Rick shrugged, giving the crowd a lopsided grin. "Next time, maybe send someone who likes saving the galaxy. I've got machines to fix." As he walked away, the leaders exchanged glances, their awe tempered by a shared realization. Humanity wasn't just surviving, they were rewriting the rules. And Rick Carter, the reluctant mechanic, had just reminded the galaxy why.